Hello and welcome to Curious Austriteurs. William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was an English poet, actor and dramatist, frequently called the English national poet and also considered by many to be the greatest dramatist of all time. Shakespeare was baptised at the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford upon Avon in Warwickshire on April 26, 1564. Although his birthday is traditionally celebrated on April 23rd. His father, John Shakespeare, was engaged in various kinds of trade and appears to have suffered some fluctuations in wealth. Shakespeare's mother, Mary Arden of Wilmcote, Warwickshire, came from an ancient family and was the heiress to some land. Little is known of William's early life, but it is thought that he may have attended the town's free grammar school, learning Latin and Greek amongst many other subjects. What is known is that as an 18-year-old, Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway, a farmer's daughter from the nearby village of Shottery, in 1582. Anne was 26 at the time, and shortly following the wedding, their daughter Susanna was born. 2 years later, Anne gave birth to twins, Hamlet and Judith. Many believe that in these early years of marriage, William may well have supported his new family by becoming a school teacher. No one knows what Shakespeare did between the years of 1587, the last documented record of his formative years in Stratford, and 1592, when he is first mentioned in London. There's much speculation about those lost years, involving stories that Shakespeare was exiled from Warwickshire for deer stealing, as well as that he worked at the London playhouses, hauling horses for theatregoers. He appears to have arrived in the capital at some point around 1590. Initially, he earned a living as an actor before his first poem, Venus and Adonis, was published in 1592. By 1592, Shakespeare was well known enough as a writer and actor to be criticised by jealous rival Robert Greene as an upstart crow and Johannes Factotum in his pamphlet Groat's Worth of Wits, groat being a small coin. Even though it is difficult to determine the chronology of Shakespeare's works, well, it is likely that by 1592 Shakespeare had written 11 plays, including Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Richard III. His plays were popular. The box office profits from alone the first performance of Henry VI, Part 1, at the Rose in 1592 were £3, 16 shillings and 8 pence, the highest documented for the relevant theatre season. Among other of his works were comedies such as The Merchant of Venice and Much Ado About Nothing. Because of the plague, which caused the death of roughly 100,000 people, almost a quarter of London's population back then, in 18 months, playhouses were closed for most of the period between September 1592 to June 1594. Shakespeare published 2 classic poems during this time, The Rape of Lucrece and the other being, as mentioned before, Venus and Adonis. Shakespeare's success grew through the 1590s. He joined and became a shareholder of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, who performed before Queen Elizabeth on numerous occasions, as well as writing more plays. He published several poems and circulated his sonnet sequence in manuscript. Yet his personal life was dealt a severe blow by the sudden death of his beloved son Hamlet, died aged 11 in 1596. Possibly partly due to this tragedy, William re-established his ties with the town of his birth by buying and renovating a large and striking mansion in Stratford upon Avon called New Place. His father's fortunes also seem to have turned for the better, as John was awarded his own coat of arms the following year. Shakespeare, in spite of buying his house and aiming to settle in Stratford upon Avon, continued to spend most of his time in London. It was about this time that he became a partner in the New Globe Theatre on Bankside, south of the Thames. This proved to be a risky but exceptionally lucrative venture. The Globe was bigger and better equipped than any of his rival theatres, including a big stage that Shakespeare utilised to the full with productions such as Julius Caesar, Henry V and Othello. After the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, King James I and VI of Scotland became king. King James I was the son of Mary Queen of Scots and Lord Darnley, the earliest king to rule over both Scotland and England. Possibly by sheer happenstance, it is generally agreed upon that Shakespeare wrote his greatest tragedies, his famous Scottish play Macbeth, sometime between 1604 and 1606. The story of two ancient Scottish kings is interspersed with strange tales of witches and the supernatural. Oddly enough, King James I had written a book about spirits and witchcraft just a few years earlier. King James I appears to have been so greatly impressed by Shakespeare that he awarded his own royal patronage on him and his partners. They became known as the King's Men, receiving twice the pay they had received before from Queen Elizabeth I. This patronage was a huge triumph for the group, but Shakespeare was by no means a puppet playwright, and he resumed to write plays that posed challenging questions about monarchy. The Jacobin works of 1604 and 08 were darker and include, besides the aforementioned plays Macbeth and Othello, the tragedy King Lear. In 1608, the King's Men took on the Second Theatre, a candlelit indoor venue at Blackfriars, whose luxurious seats catered to a more elite audience and whose lighting may have influenced the atmosphere of Shakespeare's late plays such as The Tempest. The Globe burned down in 1613, and in the same year Shakespeare left London theatre world and returned to Stratford-upon-Avon. He died on 23rd of April 1616. He was survived by his wife Anne and his two daughters. William was buried in the chancel of the Holy Trinity Church, Stratford-upon-Avon, 2 days later, where he had been baptized 52 years earlier. And lastly, let us take a brief look at the first folio. Now, some of you might already know what it is, but for you who don't know, I'll explain it. The first folio is the first collected edition of Shakespeare's plays, which was collated and published in 1623, 7 years after the playwright's death. Of the 37 plays in the first folio, 18 had not yet been printed at all. It is this fact that makes the first folio so important, because without it, many of Shakespeare's plays, including Twelfth Night, Measure for Measure, Julius Caesar, Macbeth and The Tempest, might never have survived. Now, again, there is a slight disagreement about the number of Shakespeare's plays in the first folio, and the agreed number was traditionally said to have been 37, and Shakespeare also wrote 154 sonnets and a number of longer poems. Now, contemporary scholars claim that there are several of the plays conventionally attributed solely to William Shakespeare are likely to be collaborative works with playwrights such as Christopher Marlowe and Thomas Middleton. The text was collated by the two of Shakespeare's fellow actors and friends, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, who edited it and supervised the printing. They divided the plays into comedies, tragedies and histories, an editorial decision that has come to the shape of idea of the Shakespearean canon. A majestic bust of William Shakespeare stands in the St. Mary Old Manbury Garden in the City of London as a memorial to his fellow actors Condell and Hemmings. Both actors are buried in the church. You can find a copy of the first folio at the nearby Guildhall Library in the City of London. Alright, that's it for today. I appreciate you watching this video and stay tuned for more to come. Cheerio!